Have you ever had a boss that's resigned in the middle of a big project, leaving the fate of your company in the air? Well, that's what happened this week in Germany.
Quite the drama involving Jurgen Klinsmann.
Former U.S. men's national team coach Jurgen Klinsmann abruptly chose to leave his job at Hertha Berlin this week after just 11 weeks on the job.
We had a meeting in the meeting room. Yeah, like I said, the players thought that was the meeting after the game, analyze the game against Mainz, but it was a different one. He said that he won't be a coach anymore.
Of course, the way I did it was questionable and open to criticism. In that case, I apologize.
Today we look at why Jurgen Klinsmann really left Hertha Berlin and what the fallout of the decision will be for Klinsmann and the club.
Yeah, I think it was kind of a surprising one because it wasn't something that was expected, even though they had lost at the weekend against Mainz.
Ronan Murphy is a football journalist for Goal and covers German football.
I was out and about. I was looking through my phone as I do when I'm in shopping queues or that sort of thing, and there was this kind of vague tweet from Klinsmann linking to a Facebook link, and then everyone was kind of talking about how he had stepped down by a Facebook statement, which is kind of not really what you would expect from a major club in one of Europe's top 5 leagues these days. You expect kind of the official statement to come from the club, or even when it does come from the club, you expect to hear kind of murmurs about it in the days before, and even after the Mainz defeat, I don't think it was something people were expecting. I don't think that anyone thought that the club were unhappy with Klinsmann because he had picked up 3 wins in the 10 games since he took charge. I know they'd got knocked out of the cup and they'd lost to Mainz at home. Things like this are going to happen when you're a team battling relegation, but they're 6 points clear of the drop, and I don't think they are going to get relegated. So it was a shock for everybody at the club, and I think even some of the board members and stuff like that kind of didn't really see this coming. They were only told about it just before it actually happened, and it's a kind of shocked German football, and it's even shocked world football that someone can only be there for less than 3 months and then be gone.
As you mentioned, he did post this resignation on Facebook, which was a bit odd. What did he say in that Facebook post?
Yeah, so I won't really read it because it's a bit boring, but the start of it was kind of how he was happy enough as things were going, and he was proud of the work he had done, and then kind of 3/4 of the way down through the statement he just says, bang, I'm gone, I'm not happy enough with the way things are going. Essentially the initial statement was that he didn't feel he had the club's backing, which seemed a kind of confusing thing for many fans to take on board, especially the fact that they had spent 75 million euro in the transfer window. People were kind of saying, well, what do you mean you don't have the club's backing? Because obviously they've bought you these 3 or 4 new players, and they spent more money than any other club in Europe in January. And was he expecting something different to happen at the club than actually turned out to be? Did he think he'd have more power or something like that? So the statement kind of, it was vague enough that people were still confused after reading it. So it kind of only added to the confusion even more.
And then on Wednesday, he further elaborated in a Facebook Live video. What did he say there to kind of explain things a little bit?
Yeah, so the Facebook Live video, that only added further confusion and speculation and stuff like that, because he initially announced that he was going to, in another Facebook statement, that he was going to go live on Facebook and he was going to hopefully answer all the questions that the fans have to offer. But fans took this to mean that this was going to be a Q&A, but in fact it was only kind of Klinsmann reading his own previously kind of prepared statement, or what he wanted to get out in the world. And that was essentially that he thought that he'd have more power at the club, that it'd be more like the English model where the manager has power over the signings, stuff on the field, off the field, all that sort of stuff, whereas in Germany it's only a head coach and then the sporting director or someone does these sort of roles. So
ist es halt in Deutschland anders. Ist in Deutschland eine Struktur da,
they're different in Germany,
die alle mitreden, die alle
where everyone gets to have their say, everyone plays a role, the whole management structure.
Nur einer
In the end, only one can decide, and I feel it has to be the coach.
I think he wanted more power, and he was disappointed with the fact that Michael Preetz, the sporting director, he was often talking to the media and he was often the man making decisions, whereas Klinsmann was kind of left out of the loop, and that caused kind of struggles between the two of those. And I think it was they butted heads a bit too much, and Klinsmann wasn't happy about this, and he kind of wanted to be the club's technical director in the long term. This isn't something he said in the video, but it seems to be the story that's coming out, that he wanted to be the technical director in the long term, and with Preetz as a sporting director, that just wasn't something that was going to happen in the future or next season. So he decided that this was the time to kind of cut his losses with the club.
Why do you think that he thought that was a possibility? He got the position only a couple months ago. Did he have promises then that he was going to be this figure at the club that everyone kind of reported to and he had all the power?
I suppose initially investor Lars Windhorst, who's spent 224 million to get nearly half the club last summer, he was the man who brought in Klinsmann, and he brought him to the executive board, and from there Klinsmann got the job as the head coach. So I suppose coming from that angle, Klinsmann probably thought he was friends with Windhorst, and he would be able to then maybe get the role he wanted in the club after proving his worth by coming in as coach and saving their season and keeping them in the Bundesliga. And I think maybe he thought more of his standing at the club than he was higher standing at the club than he really was, and I think that kind of came true for him when Preetz kept making statements to the media, and Preetz kept kind of overruling maybe his decisions in the back room.
To me, he kind of comes across a little bit almost delusional in saying that they didn't back him enough and that he didn't agree with the German model of essentially having a sporting director. How do you think he came across?
Yeah, I think he probably does come a bit across like that, and I think US media is kind of reporting the same.
And the closer you look at things, the more you realize than ever that Klinsmann is completely delusional at this point. This is the same Klinsmann who recently had another public delusion when he said that he could have taken the US to the semifinals of World Cup 2018, the same World Cup that the US didn't qualify for, largely due to Jurgen Klinsmann.
I think some of the German media have taken the same trend that what was he thinking was going to happen. This was always the way. He went in as a coach to be a coach and to take control of the team, and that was it. And he doesn't have the same responsibilities as an English manager, as a maybe an Arsene Wenger or an Alex Ferguson or someone like that would have at an English club. And it would be surprising maybe for an English manager or someone like that if they had to come over and they'd been used to things all one way all their career. But Klinsmann never managed in England. He only played in England. So it's not like he had this kind of responsibility before. He was the Bayern Munich coach and he was the America and the Germany coach. He should know how things work. So it's kind of surprising that he'd come out with these statements because of his history. He shouldn't have been naive about the role he was set to take on as Hertha Berlin coach.
We mentioned earlier that he posted all of this essentially on Facebook instead of through official club accounts. What does that tell us about his relationship with the leadership at Hertha?
Yeah, I think he was a bit of a loose cannon all the way along because, like I was saying, he announced that he was going to do this Facebook Live and fans thought it was a Q&A. But the reason for that they thought it was going to be a Q&A is because he actually used to do Q&As with the fans after Hertha matches and before Hertha matches and just regularly on Facebook. And he kind of was building his brand and getting followers there as much as maybe he was being the Hertha coach. And I think the personality of Jurgen Klinsmann maybe was too big for him and for the club, and that's probably where the problems lay. It wasn't kind of a unified thing. And we had former Hertha forward Eric Beer was speaking to the media this week. He was talking to my colleague in goal and Spox in Germany, and he was saying that instead of the way he did it, he should have been more unified and the club should have all come together, but instead he just walked away. And I think this is some of the sentiment of a lot of Hertha fans as well. They kind of see him as a coward for stepping down when the times got tough for him, and it's not like he's really that close to a relegation battle. Things would have to go spectacularly wrong for them to be relegated. If anything, he should have really just stuck on till the end of the season and then stepped down. But that isn't the way things have worked out, unfortunately.
Let's track back a little bit to find out how we got to this point. This summer, Lars Windhorst, as you mentioned, a German businessman, made a major investment of about 224 million euros, with almost also a promise of more investment to come. What was the reaction to that investment, and what was he kind of saying with that investment?
Yeah, I think the reaction was a bit mixed. I think fans were kind of sceptical, and some people would look to his previous kind of business endeavours that he went bankrupt a couple of times with different companies, but at the same time they hoped that this money would be good for the club and finally get the club to maybe where it belongs in an international and in the European stage, because this is a team who haven't won the Bundesliga since the 1930s, and the last time they even came second in the Bundesliga was 1975, so it's not like a huge international success story. It's not like this is a guy that's just bought into a club that's doing well. This is a club who regularly mid-table, and they were, for a city the size of Berlin, it's something he kind of pointed into after investing himself, that they deserved a bigger club, and it's the biggest city in continental Europe, and they're really an afterthought when it comes to capital cities football teams. So
Manchester, Madrid, Rome, Lisbon, Liverpool, Moscow, Milan, Istanbul, London. Just about every major European city has at least a couple world-famous soccer teams. What about here in Berlin? Despite being capital of football-crazed Germany, Berlin's known as being a bit of a soccer black hole, better known for thumping techno and fine art than for sports.
So he was trying to break them into the Champions League and make them a power into Europe, though. Those were the promises that he was kind of making.
Yeah, initially he said the kind of medium-term goals were to make them into a team that got into Europe every season and then got into the Champions League. And he said that there wasn't a limit on how long he would spend taking to get there, but that he would definitely invest more money into it. And from the fact that they were signing players like Luka Bacchio willing to take these risks, and even appointing someone like Klinsmann, kind of a world-renowned figure, I think it kind of indicated that, yes, it was someone who was interested in maybe the football side of things a bit more than he initially let on, and I think they were hopeful that was going to be a success. And I think even now, after this Klinsmann drama, I think they are still hopeful that it can be a success.
So Windhorst makes a big investment and makes some big promises. How does the season unfold after that? Do they feel like a different club compared to the old Hertha Berlin?
Yeah, I don't think they feel like that different of a club, because they didn't really spend hugely in the summer window. I think there was some sort of continuity there, and that was probably helped by the fact that the head coach that they brought in, Ante Czovic, he had been the youth coach, and it was someone that was familiar with players and someone who was familiar with the fans and someone who kind of knew the club inside out. So I think initially it kind of seemed to be that there was a small bit of an investment, but this was going to be a slow process, but they had a coach taking the reins that was going to be someone that would continue on the Hertha tradition while developing the team into something new and bringing on this new era. But unfortunately, results didn't go Chovic's way, and the pressure kind of was on early on, and there was a space of 3 defeats in a row in August, September, and that kind of put the pressure on immediately. And then they did pick a couple of wins, but they were always kind of underperforming. And I think the fact that Czovic was such an inexperienced manager, there was this kind of idea that money was going to come in and more money was going to come in and there was going to be more investment. I think they really had to pull the trigger, and they had to look for someone else and maybe look for someone that could bring the club forward in the way that maybe he didn't seem to be able to do.
And so that's where Jurgen Klinsmann comes into this whole episode. In the beginning of November, Klinsmann was named to the board. What prompted that move, and then later him becoming manager?
I think Windhorst, he's a clever businessman, so he probably saw someone like Klinsmann as someone who could bring the media attention on Hertha Berlin, and that is something he did. Even the appointment of him to the board, whereas this is a non-story for the majority of the clubs, because it was Klinsmann, because he was a former US national team manager, because he was a former World Cup manager with Germany, that he got them to third place in the World Cup. This was somebody that could bring the kind of media attention and could use his charisma. And when he was appointed, Michael Preetz talked about his massive charisma. It was somebody who maybe could come into the club and be more than just a simple board member, but could be someone who could help promote the club internationally. And someone like that is especially someone who's a Hertha Berlin fan. And
I've got a bit of history here thanks to my father, who was a passionate Hertha fan. The first game I ever watched in the Bundesliga was Hertha against Stuttgart. I was 8 years old, in the stands with a blue and white flag in my hands. My son was even at the club for a couple of years as a young goalkeeper.
I think that kind of family ethos, as well as the business side of things, and the fact he's such a worldwide name, it was a no-brainer to invite him to the board anyway.
But when it comes to managing, he had failed previously as the U.S. men's national team coach. I mean, he didn't even get them to qualify for the World Cup in 2018. And then before that, he was the Bayern manager, and that failed pretty spectacularly as well. So it seems like they were appointing him mostly for the PR and not really for his actual managerial acumen.
Yeah, I think that you're probably not too far off the mark with that, because he brought in Alexander Nuri, former Werder Bremen boss, to be kind of his assistant coach, and essentially Nuri took charge of the training sessions. It was him who was kind of responsible for the tactical side of things, because if you look back at his time with America and his time with Bayern, it was always the tactical side of things that kind of let him down. And Philip Lahm even said in his autobiography that the players had to kind of get together and decide what to do themselves, and Jurgen would only come in and kind of say at half time, he would only say, just go out there and score another goal, guys, and things like this. And I think the coaching side of things was really the problem for him, but I think fans were happy enough to accept him coming on board because he brought Nuri with him, and they thought that Nuri would be the tactical mastermind behind things, just the way that Joachim Löw was with Germany in 2006. It was Löw who was really doing the coaching. It was really him and his tactics that got them to the World Cup semi-final. So I think fans were happy enough for this appointment, because once again it was bringing the media spotlight on the club. And although there was many people sceptical about it, the fact that Nuri was coming in kind of helped to ease that scepticism somewhat.
What does this say about Hertha Berlin's leadership that they appointed him in the first place? I mean, if you look at some of the other top clubs that have risen recently in Germany, like Borussia Mönchengladbach and Leipzig, they've appointed young, progressive coaches, and Hertha Berlin essentially hired a failed manager who's been in the job for a long time.
I think what essentially happened is they were looking to appoint Niko Kovac, and he probably would have been the preferred candidate, the former Bayern Munich and Eintracht Frankfurt head coach, but they couldn't get him because he wants to take some time out after the disappointment at Bayern, and he may be someone that they'll look at in the summer, and I think he will be kind of their preferred candidate to take on next season if he is willing to take the job. So you probably have to look at it in that way, that they weren't able to get the man they wanted, but at the same time they also had the business side of things and Windhorst's investment, and they were looking at it from a business angle and appointing someone like Klinsmann. Although he may be a failed manager, in US eyes he's still a big name, and he did it with Germany, so he does have somewhat of a track record that he might be able to be a success, especially if he can get a good number two. So I think that's the way they looked at it. Klinsmann will come in and it'll help build the brand, and if he does succeed, well, great, but if he doesn't succeed, well, sure, we'll just be a mid-table club again this season, and maybe we can reassess things next season and bring in the right man for the job.
So he was in his job for about 11 weeks with the club. How would you characterize those 11 weeks with the club? I know they made a bunch of signings in January. How did that go?
I think for the club itself, in the long term, it'll probably work out. This period where Klinsmann was at the helm probably wasn't that bad a period, and results, they picked up 3 wins and 3 draws under him, and they moved well clear a relegation zone, and I think some of the teams below them are struggling much worse than they are, so it shouldn't be a problem for them to avoid relegation altogether. And the fact that they spent well in January, they brought in Piatek and Askasibar and Kuna from Leipzig, and they have 2 Sartiv they've spent the money on him, but he's not coming till next season. It gives them a good platform to work on, and it actually makes them maybe an appealing club for a new head coach to come into. So I think overall the state of Hertha is probably better off now than when Klinsmann started, but it's nothing to do with him really. It's just kind of, it has worked out that way because of the money that they've invested.
So what do you think the effects of his resignation will be on the club this season and beyond?
Yeah, I think they'll probably think twice about the next permanent head coach that they appoint. They might just bring in someone like Bruno Labbadia for the rest of the season. He seems to be one of the favourites at the moment. Just someone who's used to a relegation battle and securing the safety of a team in the top flight and maybe getting the best out of players. I think they'll be happy enough to take on a temporary coach, but I think Klinsmann's failure will make them think twice perhaps about who they will take on as their permanent coach next season and going forward into the future. And I think Niko Kovac does fit the bill perfectly because, like you said earlier, he is one of these young progressive coaches, and I think they will kind of look for someone like that. Someone who maybe has success elsewhere, a bit of success maybe at a lower club, or look to someone that's managed in Switzerland or Austria like Gladbach have. And I think they'll look for someone who's young and can develop with the club and will get the best out of these new signings, and someone who will be rewarded and will reward the club with any investment they make in players signings then in the summer and in January and even next year.
Are there any players or executives that really stand to benefit as a result of this resignation?
Yeah, I think it probably strengthens Michael Prietz's status at the club. I think because Klinsmann wasn't able to work with him and he seems to be doing things right in the business part of things. He seems to be bringing in the right players to the team. He seems to be identifying problems with the team and sort of fixing them. I think he stands to benefit hugely from it. He might even have more say after this whole incident than he might have beforehand.
Let's take a step back and look at Klinsmann's reputation in Germany. You mentioned his reputation now kind of with Hertha fans has taken a big hit. What do you think his reputation is like in Germany after this?
Yeah, his reputation in Germany probably wasn't the best even before he took the job, because people remember his time at Bayern Munich when he kind of brought in these kind of touchy-feely aspects to training, where he looked to other sports and he looked to other cultures and stuff like that. And people remember he had a quiet room at Bayern, but the thing that stood out and he's constantly reminded of is the Buddha statues he put up around the Bayern Munich training ground, and he was kind of criticised by local Christian ministers and people like that at the time for doing this. And it still gets brought up, kind of, what's this Eastern religion kind of doing in a football club, and people are kind of confused by it. And as a coach then, the fact he failed so spectacularly at Bayern, that's also not very well remembered. And if you add that onto this Hertha thing, his reputation is going to be kind of through the floor in Germany, because as a club coach he hasn't been successful at all and he hasn't really proved a lot. And I know he got America to a couple of World Cups and he did well with Germany at the World Cup, but in club management he just won't have a good reputation at all. And I think if he is to have any future in football, especially in Germany, it's going to be in maybe a technical director role, something like what he was angling for at Hertha. I think maybe that's the only future for him now.
If you're another club now, I think Jurgen Klinsmann's damaged goods. He's only stayed there for 70 days. It looks from the outside as if he was just wanting an out. So who's going to employ him next?
It almost feels like kind of a failed coup attempt by him.
Probably the sentiment is probably there now that this might be the case, because Michael Prietz and the various other board members who have spoken to the club president, and maybe you might even hear the owner speak eventually on it. I think the combination of all these people, they seem to be kind of indicating that he walked away from it and he just didn't get what he wanted. And in a way, it's kind of like a child throwing their toys out in the pram. It seems to be that sort of a pettiness that's there. And
Windhorst, the investor who had brought Klinsmann to Hertha, said in a news conference on Thursday that what the coach had done was not acceptable professional behaviour from an adult.
I think only in time will we really hear the full story of what really happened behind the scenes that caused this kind of nonsense to happen.
You can read all of Ronan Murphy's coverage of Jurgen Klinsmann, Hertha Berlin, and the German Bundesliga on goal.com. The show was produced by John McKenzie. I'm Josh Schneider-Weiler, and this was Football Today. And if you enjoyed the show, please rate and review us on iTunes and share it with a friend. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.